Alan Ryder, Southeastern Railway Museum, and welcome to a nice crisp fall day. And today we're going to continue our adventures with both 8954 and 1026. Both of them have little problems with the governors. 8954, sharp-eared observers from the prior videos might have noticed that the low idle on this engine doesn't work. And I've done some troubleshooting on that, and I have a pretty good idea that it's an issue with the governor. But we'll dig into that a little bit more. This one, when I was working on it the other day, I noticed that the engine speeds were screwed up. So instead of going step, 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 step up the 8th notch, it's going up and down as you advance the throttle. So I've done some work on that, and we'll look into that a little bit deeper today. So here we go. Before we get too deep into the troubleshooting process, I figured it would be a good idea to explain how the engine speeds are controlled on locomotives. So we're going to ring the school bell here and have a little bit of a lesson. Obviously what you're looking at is the governor, and the governor, pretty much its purpose in life is to control the engine speeds. It's what they call electro-hydraulic. The governor is driven by a right-angle drive, which just comes off the engine. That's kind of what I'm pointing at there with the camera. And through its hydraulics and electrical controls, it operates the lay shaft. That's this side of the engine. That's the lever that goes over here. That's the lay shaft handle, and that goes to operate the injectors to make the engine go. So inside the governor, there are 4 solenoids. Those are electric solenoids, and they operate the mechanism inside the governor, and each of the 4 solenoids will increase or decrease the speed a certain amount. Call it steps. The A solenoid, when it's energized, increases the speed by 1 step. The B solenoid, when it's energized, increases the speed by 4 steps. The C by 2 steps, and then of course the D solenoid, that's the mechanism to shut the engine down, and it decreases the speed by 2 steps. Here's a picture of the top of a governor with the lid taken off. Governor was one we had laying around inside one of our parts cars. It's a little bit tired, but you can see the 4 solenoids there, and you can actually see engraved in the stamping of the metal the labels on a couple of them, both D and B. And off to the left you can see where the electrical wires come in and are connected to from a socket where the cable plugs in into the internals of the governor to connect to the solenoids. So the next question to ask is, well, there are 3 solenoids that increase the engine speed, so how do you get 8 throttle notches? And I made up a little table which we'll walk our way through, and I'll explain how the mechanism works. Basically, they stack up the engine speeds by energizing sometimes more than 1 solenoid. So, of course, the first thing is you want to stop the engine. So, as I mentioned before, energizing the D solenoid 2 steps down, and that kills the engine. First notch, it's a little bit confusing because actually no solenoids are energized, and basically all that happens when you put the throttle in first notch is the power circuits are energized, specifically generator field. And moving on to second notch, the A solenoid, which is 1 step up, is energized, and so that gives you your second notch. Advancing to third, that energizes the C solenoid, which is 2 steps up. Going to 4th notch, well, that's where you do 2 of them. Energize A solenoid and C solenoid, so 1 step up plus 2 steps up equals 3 steps up. 5th and 6th notch are a little bit confusing because really all you really need to increase the speed is B solenoid. That's 4 steps up. But the mechanisms also energize C, which is 2 steps up, and D, which is 2 steps down. So those two cancel each other out. Why do they do that? Well, early on, when diesel engines and engine speeds were being figured out, they discovered if you don't energize the D solenoid from time to time, when you get ready to shut the engine down, it may stick and nothing happens. So on 5th and 6th notch, they energize the C and the D, they cancel each other out, and it exercises the D solenoid. Moving on to 6th notch, that's where all 4 of the solenoids are energized. A for 1 step up, B for 4 steps up, and then C and D, which cancel each other out. On the 7th, well, then you get B and C, that's 4 steps up and 2 steps up, so you have 7th notch. And finally, 8th notch, all 3 speed solenoids are energized, so that's 1 plus 4 plus 2 is 7 notches up. Now we'll step back to low idle, and way back in like the 1970s, a little after 8954 was built, people were interested in saving fuel. And somebody figured out that if you energize A solenoid, which is 1 step up, and B solenoid, which is 2 steps down, then you can lower the engine speed. So that's low idle. And that's kind of what the problem is with 8954. When you energize, put it in low idle, which has been disabled at this point, engine dies. So there's some adjustments needed. And again, I'll dig into that eventually. And that pretty much concludes the school lesson on how governors work. If you're curious, here's a table with the engine speeds for 1026 and 8954. 8th notch on 1026 is 800 RPM, and 8th notch in 8954 is around 900. These are the controls on 1026, and this is the controller. And of course, this is the throttle here, and then that's the reverser handle there. And they call that a drum controller. It's an early design. This locomotive dates to like 1950. This is the front of the control stand, and we're going to kind of pan down here as best we can. It's a pretty awkward place. You know, what else is new on locomotives? But those, get the angle right, those are the contacts that control loading and engine speeds. And there's a drum underneath there. You can kind of see it. It's brass here. And as you advance the throttle, that drum moves. You can see it move. And parts of that drum are insulated and parts of it have brass. And as the contacts come across the brass, it makes the electrical contacts and makes things go. So this is one style of control stand. We'll take a look at the one on 8954. It's a little bit different. This is a control stand for 8954, and this is pretty much the standard of the industry even today. Now, there are some locomotives that had desktop controls, but the industry trend is going back to an arrangement like this. So you got your throttle here, and that's dynamic brake, and then reverser down there. So we'll look at the back, and you can see how that's set up. This is the back of the throttle controller, and what you have here is little roller switches. There's a other end of this inside. There's rollers, and there's a cam, and as the throttle is advanced, the cam opens or closes these switches appropriately for the different engine speeds. So they're here, and then of course there's a few other ones like down here that I think those are for the reverser. And then the ones over here are set up for dynamic brake. But this is a modern setup. If you looked at any EMD locomotive, you'd see an arrangement very similar to this, and GE is about the same. They're look a little different, but same idea. This here's a 27-pin MU receptacle, and that's how this locomotive can control other locomotives, or other locomotives can control this locomotive. And that has all the functions so that this one can talk to others or vice versa. A little hint, if you have to work on one of these, it's really easy to take a screwdriver handle or a reverser handle and stick it underneath the lid like I've got it shown there to hold the lid open so you can get to the pins or pull the cable in or out. Sometimes those cables can be really tough to deal with. We're going to tackle the troubleshooting on 1026 first. So far what I've done on it is pointing to some rather weird responses, and I'll show you. Troubleshooting 1026 on engine speeds is a little easier than a lot of locomotives because they have these, it has these extra 3 relays, and they have to do with loading, but they operate directly with the governor solenoids. So this is A, B, and C. So whenever A is energized for first engine speed, then that one picks up. So they've got to do with loading, but they are controlled by the throttle just like the governor engine speed. So it makes it really easy to see which ones are picked up. Here's the weirdness of what happens. And remember from your lesson, when we put the throttle in first notch, nothing happens. You go to second notch, the A solenoid should pick up. So the relay on the left should pick up. And it does. So if we go to the third notch, the relay that's A should drop out, and relay that's C, which is the one on the far right, should pick up. But if you notice, yes, C did pick up, but so did B. And B is like, shouldn't pick up until like the 5th notch. But it's actually not picked up, and that's kind of weird, but it should. Just like that. It's energized. I checked that. Don't quite understand that, but we'll get into that. But nevertheless, C and B, which should not be picked up or energized, is. And the other weird thing, pause here for a second. If we move from the speed relays in the electrical cabinet over here to these contactors, these are the fan contactors. There's 4 cooling fans. And if you look, that's D. Or excuse me, not D, the number 4 cooling fan, which is the far one on the very end. And it's picked up. Now the fan contactors and the engine speeds are completely unrelated, or they should be. I've spent some time looking at the schematic, and that's the schematic laid out on the conductor's seat, and they're nicknamed bed sheets, and you can see why. That's actually about half of what the normal size would be, but that's the biggest that we could print. So I spent some time looking at that and figured out that, swing over here, when that contactor picks up, it also energizes the shutter solenoid to open the shutters. And so those wires and the engine speed wires go to a terminal board on the front of the locomotive. And my suspicion is that the wiring or cables or terminals have gotten shorted together. And so that's what we're going to dig into. That's on toward the rear end of the locomotive on the long hood end. So that's where we're going to head now. One of the first things to do in troubleshooting is to look for low voltage grounds. And here we have the test lights hooked from battery positive to ground. And so we have a low voltage ground. And from positive to ground means there's a negative low voltage ground. So this continues to indicate that we have some problems with these 3 wires. Governor C, governor B, and the shutter magnet valve on the number 4 cooling fan contactor. Another trick with low voltage grounds is to operate the suspect equipment, and often the ground will switch from negative to positive. So we'll do that. So move over here to the control stand, reach over, put it in third notch, which is where the problem is. Move the camera back over here, and the negative ground's gone away. Take this, move it over here, and now it's on the positive side. So again, this just gives you a general idea where the issues are. So my next troubleshooting step is to take a meter and measure resistance, and I prefer to use my Simpson meter because it puts out a little bit more current when you're measuring resistance than a newer digital meter. Of course, if this was used on like electronics, sensitive electronics, it would probably toast them. But for this thing, the Simpson meter is just fine. And as you can see, it's reading 0 ohms. And so if you follow the leads back, these two terminals down here, or B and C terminals for the governor, and this is where it comes from the control stand and the throttle, to this terminal board, the main terminal board, and then goes out to the governor. And there's another terminal board on the other end, and then on up to the governor. So I've got the meter connected. One end's on ground and one end is on one of the studs for the governor speed, either C or C or B, I don't remember which one. And you follow it over to the meter, and we're reading about 10 ohms resistance to ground. So the cables are shorted together and grounded somewhere. So I have spent an inordinate amount of time troubleshooting the wiring in this long hood end terminal board, and I think I've come to the conclusion that the problem is not here. One of the reasons I don't think the problem is in this terminal or on this end, if you can see, and it isn't particularly easy, but that's where the main bundle comes up out of the conduit to this terminal board. And the one that goes to this way is for the terminals that are on the right side of the terminal board, and that's where this TD wire, which is the shutter magnet valve wire, goes. But the engine speed wires, this thing splits like somewhere right around there, and it goes around to the other side, and most of the engine speed wires are over here. So after wiggling and jiggling and disconnecting some wires, I pretty much concluded that whatever the issue is with the wires being rubbed together or grounded probably isn't on this end. So I'm going to go look in the main electrical cabinet and see if I can figure it out on that end, which is back in the cab. It's been a few days now, and I spent an inordinate amount of time troubleshooting this thing and trying to figure out where these wires are shorted together. And of course, this is the main terminal board, and we follow it down, and it goes down there, and then where that light is, you can just barely see. I can get it where I'm pointing in the right direction. You can just barely see where the cable's right there. That's where they exit the electrical cabinet and go out toward the long hood end. I'm in the generator room now, and generator's over here. This is the back of the electrical cabinet. We move the camera in, down and around as close as I can get. That's all that bundle of wiring going from the main cabinet into conduit. Here's the conduit. You can probably just barely see, but it's there, and that goes to the long hood end terminal board. And I've been doing a ton of wiggling and jiggling of these wires, and it's had no effect on the wires being shorted together. So that's telling me that wherever the problem is, it's probably inside that conduit and not readily accessible, which is a very bad thing. Often the wires will chafe where they enter the conduit. My thinking on troubleshooting this engine is that with the engine speed wires going to the long hood end, and this one wire from the shutter magnet valve, they go to the long hood end. So the only place they could be together would be in that cable going that direction, or in the bundle in the electrical cabinet. So before I decided to pull a bunch of new wires or run some temporary wiring, I did the important thing, which was to disconnect the suspect wires at the terminal board. This is the main terminal board, and this is one of the guilty wires here, and here's another one. And I disconnected those to check which two were shorted together, and this one and this one were shorted together. It turns out those do not go to the long hood end as I suspected. They actually go to the front MU receptacle. So we need to troubleshoot in a different direction. And the other interesting thing that happened, so all the wires from the terminal board go down into this wad down here and along there and way down deep. You can move this over a little bit. There we go. Some of them go into the bundle, which goes to the long hood end, and even further down, there's another bundle that goes into the conduit, and it's either that piece of conduit or there's another one, and that goes to the short hood and MU receptacle, and also the headlights and things like that. Well, somewhere in there, when I was tracing these wires, the ground went away. Now the two wires are still shorted together, but there's no ground. So I suspect that somewhere in this wad is where the wires are shorted together. But before I start taking them apart, I'm going to go to the terminal board, which I'll show you in a minute, on the short hood end, and clean that out and disconnect the wires there to isolate it. Felix is going to do the great unveiling, so go ahead and lift that panel up. This is right at the nose of the locomotive. Just pull it towards you, it'll be fine. And underneath here is a terminal board. And what I remember from NS is these are notorious for getting dirt, rust, and whatever in them, since they're right underneath the walkway. And this one's no exception. To the left is full of sand and leaves and all sorts of other garbage. So the first thing I'm going to do is to vacuum and clean that out, and then we'll go from there. So Felix and Elijah and Ryan are going to vacuum all that crud out of there. And I don't really think the problem is in this terminal board or junction box, but we're going to clean it out, and then that way I can separate the wires that come in and verify for sure where the trouble is. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera off, and they're going to make dust and noise and all that other kind of good stuff. One of the things I learned the hard way when I was working on that main terminal board was these studs are so corroded that sometimes the rust won't let the nut back off all the way. I got them broken loose, for example, but then as I backed it off, it got harder and harder. It's like, this stud might break as I backed it off. And in fact, in the main cabinet, one of them did break. So I'll have to make some temporary repairs on that. But what you see there is the solution. That's a thread chasing die, and that's one of the studs or one of the terminals I want to disconnect. So I'm going to run that thread chasing die down and clean up the threads on those two studs where we're going to take off the wires so we can isolate the issues down. I got the nuts off the two terminals, haven't taken the wires off yet, but I definitely needed that thread chasing die because even with some spray lube, they still fought me a bit. But they came off, so now we'll do some diagnosis. Pulled the wires off the studs, and the problem is definitely between this terminal board and the main terminal board in the cab, so that's where we're going to look next. I had a heck of a time trying to figure out where the bundle of wires from the terminal board goes into a conduit to the short hood end terminal board. And it's not this one. That goes to the control stand. It's not this one. It's not this one. So I looked and looked and looked, and finally when I pulled this plate back, way down underneath here is where the wires go into the conduit that goes to the short hood end. So way down there, underneath the conduit and inside the frame, tucked right next to the web of the frame rail, there it is, the end of the conduit and the wires coming from the terminal board going to the short hood end terminal board. Well, Houston, we have a problem, and it's a biggie. We have found the source of the wire shorted together, and it's a lot worse than what I thought. This is the bundle of wires going to the short hood end, and if you look at these, a lot of them are bare. There's a whole bunch of them where the insulation has fallen off, and whether the camera can see it or not, I'm not sure, but it's bad. And so it's a lot more than just those two governor wires shorted together. There's a lot more of them that are bad, and they just don't happen to be shorted at the time. This is some more right here. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is that at some point we're going to have to rewire this locomotive, or at least not really the whole locomotive. We're going to have to pull new wires from the short hood end terminal board where I was a little while ago to here and hook them up. And there's a whole bunch of wires there, but at least it's a relatively short run. So this is not good, but it could be worse. Basically, at this point, the locomotive is out of service because, who knows which wires can short together and do what. So bad news, but at least we know what the problem is. And we have a postscript as all is not lost. These wires that are giving us trouble all go to the front multiple unit receptacle. We don't MU locomotives here, have no need to. So simple solution for the time being is to cut the wires off at the terminal board with handy dandy wire cutters, and all should be good. Eventually, we'll bring the locomotive into the shop when we have time and take care of this problem in a more permanent way by pulling wires through the conduit, and all the other problems that it has that are similar, but whatever. And we will go from there. So I got all but about 3 of these wires cut and pulled back, and most of the ends are buried in the terminal board where it would be really hard to see. But there's a couple here. So, the process is to tug and see where it goes, and make sure you got the right one. So here's an example. Pull this one back. I already cut it. So right there it is. So we grab our diagonal cutters, reach in here, and cut it, just like that. So there you have it. All the offending wires in that bundle down there, stashed away where you can't hardly see it, are cut away from the terminal board up here and down there. And there's the mortal remains. So now we put everything together that's loose and see what happens. Everything should be wonderful. We have success with our repairs. What we got to do on 8954 should be a lot more straightforward. I had already done some troubleshooting on the locomotive, so I kind of know what's going on, and with that, I will show you. The concept of low idle came out a little while after, about the same time this locomotive was built, so it was retrofitted with low idle, and that's usually done with a panel like this one. This is a low idle panel. And it's, a few relays, and then somewhere up in there, there's a rectifier too. There's a rectifier. And if you look here, that wire's been disconnected. And so low idle was disabled on this locomotive. And, I had figured that out. If I hook the low idle back up, the engine dies. So that pretty much leads me to the assumption, which we'll verify in a little bit, that the governor engine speeds need to be adjusted. Low idle and a lot of other features that came later are strictly local to the locomotive itself. This information going to low idle does not go through the MU cable to other locomotives. So, if the engineer on the control stand puts the locomotive or the consist in, say, 4th notch or in some notch, and that information is conveyed to the control system on the locomotive, be it like a mechanical governor, which is what you see here, or electronic fuel injections, which works exactly the same way. The control system decides what to do with it. And generally, it's 1st notch, 2nd notch, 3rd, but it might be other things on other locomotives. So what we're going to do is we will simulate through the MU receptacle putting this locomotive in low idle, which just simply involves putting jumpers on the 2 MU pins that will simulate low idle. And my guess is when we do that, the engine's going to die. And again, that will verify that there's nothing electrically wrong with the control system. That's strictly the governor.
All right, I'm going to simulate low idle. I've got the jumper on 15, which is C, and the jumper on 3, which is D. So when I connect this to power, which should be 13, it's probably going to die.
It's not supposed to do that. It was supposed to go to low idle. So there's an issue with the governor. So we're not going to try to adjust the governor this time. The reality is low idle, it's probably better for the engine to be in normal idle than low idle anyway. So we're going to leave it like it is and get to it someday. Well, that about finishes things up. 1026 is serviceable now with its temporary permanent repairs, and we're going to add the front MU conduit to the list of things we'll have to eventually take care of, but for now it's good to go. And swinging over here, 8954, we now know for sure that the issue's with the governor, and that's a matter of doing some adjustments. And not a high priority. We'll get to it sooner or later. And that finishes this video up. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, come see us here in the Atlanta area. Got lots of interesting stuff. And thank you very much for watching.